Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. So,
Morning.
good morning. How are you guys today? Everything good? Okay lah, kan? Okay. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to continue with another sessions of the acid trip. As for today's sessions, we're going to learn about the lesson plan and assessment. Okay. I do believe everyone here is not a new teacher, right? I mean, like you might be going to be a new staff for the UOW, but then for teaching and learning, for assessing the students, I believe you have quite a number of the experience, okay, when developing the lesson plan, delivering the assessment, the classroom, and so on, so forth. So, did you able to hear me? Is that my voice okay? Not okay? Okay.
Yes, very clear.
Very clear. Okay. All right. So okay, so for today's topic is basically about lesson plan and assessment. Okay, let me go through what we have for today sessions. Just a quick fun fact. Okay, average attention span according to the, hold on, let me close, research by the Microsoft Corporations for the students, each, if you are basically 25 years old today, you are basically able to focus up until 12 seconds. For slightly older than that, younger than that, is basically 8 seconds. And the goldfish, I believe all of us here are basically a goldfish, including me. We are old already. Okay, so hold on, give me a second. This is how basically Forgetting Curveman by the Herman, saying that whatever that we're going to learn today, or even whenever that you are conducting a classroom together with your students, after all the lessons done, what's going to happen are the students are basically able to remember. It has been said that after 1 hour, whatever that we are discussing in the classroom is only can last 50% for their memory. After 24 hours, 70% lost. And 1 week, they don't even remember whatever they are basically learning with you in the class on the last week session. Is that true? Teachers and lecturers that I have for today, right? Whenever that we are coming to the class on the particular weeks and sessions, whenever we ask, did you guys remember what we are learning on the last week? What was the students going to answer you? Basically, they're going to like completely be quiet, right? Why they are being quiet? Are they shy in the classroom? No, they are basically don't remember any whatever that we have been teaching on the last week classes. Okay, for today's sessions, like I said, what we're going to learn is basically to learn about the lesson plan, or also known as a course learning, the CLO, course learning outcome. Objective for today's session is generally to identify the important component in lesson planning and assessment. I believe as a teacher, as a lecturer, educators, anything that we call ourselves, okay, is basic. The most important part in our task is basically not just teaching, but also in developing the curriculum for the subject. So for today topic, we are basically going to go through whatever it takes in order to develop a lesson plan. Again, like I said, I do believe most of us here we are not a new teacher. We are basically quite familiar in curriculum developments and so on and so forth, and come to our subject and so on, so forth. Like today's session is basically a refresher course. We're going to refresh back whatever that we might going to forget. We might not know how to do it. We might need to recall back whatever that we don't remember before, but apparently I do believe everyone here are basically having a very good knowledge about lesson planning and assessment. Then to identify the document required and lesson planning, use a suitable verbs in learning outcome. Create a lesson based on the learning outcomes and apply the event of instructions. Okay, create a quality assessment and marking rubrics. When we talk about the lesson plan, I do believe you are basically familiar what is a lesson plan. Lesson plan is basically a structure, okay, of a planning week, what we wanted to teach accordingly on particular semester when it comes to the week 1, week 2, week 3, and so on. So for that, what we call as a lesson plan. In the other terms, we call it as it's a lesson plan, okay, but then we also have another time that we call it as a course learning outcome, what we wanted to achieve after we done all the lesson plan. We are not just planning the lessons, but we also have objective behind it, which is this is what we wanted the student to achieve after they done all the lesson as we structured them. So if you fail to plan, you are basically planning to fail, okay? So the key factor of leading the effective learning is basically first a lesson clarity, which is a logical step-by-step, audible and distraction-free instructional variety and task orientations. Student engagement and also success rate. When it comes to the lesson clarity, definitely for us to deliver whatever it needs to be delivered in very good manner, definitely, and also clear to the student. The student need to understand what we are wanted to deliver to them. Okay, then using the variety of instructional material, teaching strategy, and type of the feedback. Okay, I do believe on the current era in technology, we have a lot of various engagement, how we wanted to do our classrooms, okay, which is we can do conventional classroom, which is sit in the classroom, do the teaching as usual. But you know, the student nowadays, their attention when come to the conventional classroom, they are not able to focus to you more than, I can say, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or maybe less than that. Okay, so what we are always suggesting, like on our classroom management classes last time, what you can do is basically engage them and using different type of the classroom instructional material. So means you can do a quiz, you can do online learning, you can do the classroom as a classroom conventional, and the other thing, what we call as a blended learning, which is you including every single thing in order to make the class are more fun and so on, so forth. Okay, task orientation, clear objective and activity to maximize the classroom time and student engagement. This is what we wanted to do when come to the class. Okay, we wanted the student to engage toward the lesson, whatever that we wanted to deliver. And after that is a success rate. A higher success rate increase the student's self-esteem and motivation to excel in the subject. Plan a meaningful course outline. So how are we going to plan a meaningful course outline? In our institution at the moment, whenever that you come and as a new staff and as a new lecturer here, we're going to make you guys life much more easy. Why? Because you're going, whatever course that we have is basically already been accredited by the by the MQA, which is by having so, we are basically having the COPA Table 4, which is, this is what we call as a blueprint for the subject, or even the blueprint for the program itself. So I do believe everyone ever heard about the COPA Table 4. Am I right? Yes? Okay, so how are you going to do the course outline? Like I said, refer back to the table 4. Okay, whenever you be assigned to teach a specific subject, the first thing is basically for you to ask about the course outline from your program leader, from the academic department head of your faculty, or from your school, and so on and so forth. They surely have this one. So from that, it's basically for you to deliver whatever it needs to be delivered. Because like I said again, this is basically a blueprint for the subject, blueprint for the program. So what is the concerns about the table 4? Table 4, overall view of the course content for the whole semester is going to plan replacement class activity and assessment. Important document for students to plan their study. Is not just an important document for a teacher, a lecturer, which is us, but it's also important document for the students to understand what they're going to study throughout the semester on the specific subject. Okay, is that available for the student to access? Yes. We make it available for the student, but not a table 4 as a blueprint. We turn it into the what we call as a course outline for the study and subject. So this is a specific idea of the course outline. So what we have on the course outline, is basically the academic calendar. Is a week that indicate here. You can put a date if you want to for your course outline, and usually it's going to refer to the academic calendar. Then we have to the CLO mapping and also the topic. So where you're going to get this topic and CLO mapping is basically from your table 4 for the subject. And then this is your timetable. Whatever the class to be indicated in your timetable, you can always put there. Then advice to include the hours, which is the planned activity. So what is your plan for that particular weeks? If you're going to plan to have a class assessment, if you plan to have a quiz, if you wanted to play a games with the student in the classroom, you can always put that, not a problem. Then the remarks is basically in case your class time and days are basically have been placed on the specific public holiday, perhaps you can put the remarks. So what you can do with the remarks, definitely after that you would have to done the what we call it replacement classes. So whenever they have a remarks here, then you can indicate when you're going to do your plan of the replacement classes, or maybe the other planning, saying that okay, for today classes I'm going to double up the class in order to replace whatever have been missing due to the public holiday last time. So change accordingly to the activity. Like I said, your lesson plan is basically a changeable. Okay, like the date, the planned, the activity that you are wanted to do on your student. Perhaps you are teaching the similar subject this semester and following semester. Then for this semester, you have a different plan when it comes to the activity. Following semester, you wanted to do something else. Is that fine to do so? The answer is yes. It's always a changeable for the lecturer. So because we believe different lecturer, they have a different approach when it comes to the teaching. They have a different approach when it comes to the teaching. Hence, we're going to allow those things are basically changeable. Okay, assessment weightage and also submission date. When it comes to the remarks, you can also indicate the assessment weightage, which is the assignments, the submission date, when you are planning for the student to do the submissions on the assessment accordingly. Replacement and additional class. This is what I said just now. If you need to cancel the class, or we're not going to say cancel the class, we're going to say postpone the class due to the several concern, you can always do the replacement and make a remark accordingly on your lesson plan. Replacement and additional classes must be approved by your head of school and ADH and document and the replacement extra class form. Okay, creating a course learning outcome. So again, like I said, I do believe you are familiar about the course learning outcome, the one that indicate on your table 4. So what is a CLO? It's basically we're going to refresh back whatever we might happen to forgot. CLO is a list out of the measurable skill, knowledge, and value of the student. Sorry. Can demonstrate at the end of the lesson. CLO informs students unambiguously of the knowledge or skill and the level they are expected to achieve at the end of the session. CLO guides the teacher on the depth of the topic, classroom activity, and assessment type of the questions. So what is the CLO? CLO is basically the course learning outcome. Course learning outcome is basically referred to what we wanted student to achieve at the end of the subject, at the end of the topic, at the end of the semester. So means when we're going to start the first week of the semester, when we're going to meet the student, we already have in the mind saying that, okay, by end of the semester, I want my student are able to do this and that and so on and so forth throughout my classes. That's what we call as a course learning outcome. So every subject, they have their own course learning outcome. So which is it indicate in the table 4. So like I said, this is basically to measure a skill, knowledge, and value of the students by the end of the lesson or the end of the semester. Because we're going to project, we're going to predict that our students are able to achieve this because I teach them throughout the semester. Our students are able to do it because I guide them how to do it throughout the semester. So that's how we indicate the course learning outcome. When it comes to the course learning outcome, they are basically three different aspects that we wanted the student to achieve, which is this aspect also depends on the nature of the subject. So means we believe different programs that exist in the UOW at the moment, they do have a different nature of the program and include the different nature of the subject. So what indicate under the CLO, they have a three component, what we call as a domain, a cognitive, psychomotor, and also affective domain. Cognitive domain is basically the ability of the student to think and also do the problem solving, which is toward the cognitive value. The psychomotor is a skill, which is whatever program that indicate the student to have a specific skill. So we're going to assess them accordingly under the psychomotor. And affective is basically to the emotion, feeling, and attitude. This is basically what we consider as a lifelong learning, which is how we wanted the student to become as a person. Okay, so we wanted them to have a value on the certain thing. We wanted them to have these when come to their affective domains. Still also should be specific, measurable, relevance, and achievable and given at a given time. Do remember whenever that you develop the CLO, those CLO need to be measurable. So means, can you measure this is CLO? If you wanted them to have a specific skill, okay, saying like you are doing the cooking classes. So by end of the topic, I wanted the student to be able to cook a nasi lemak. So can we measure the skill of the students? If you are able to measure, then you can indicate on the CLO. If those the domain are basically not able to measure, we are not going to suggest to put under the CLO. Whatever that you design when come to the CLO for the specific topic and subject, it have to be measurable. Why measurable? Then because we are going to use a rubric in order to do the measurable, which is the rubric of the assessment. Okay. Bloom taxonomy is a useful tool to provide measurable action verb to for cognitive domain. Then the other two measurable domain, which is include the affective and psychomotor. So usually when we are designing the CLO under curriculum review, which is I do believe every school have been practicing the curriculum review every semester or maybe at least once a year, okay? So whenever you do the curriculum review, you wanted to revise certain things on your subject, saying that this subject are basically, the topic is quite outdated. It doesn't up to date whatever to the current trends, needs and wants, the trends, the industry needs and wants. So we need to change a bit. We need to do a curriculum review. Can you do it? Can you change the table 4? The answer is yes. The table 4 is a changeable but including the CLO, but it need to be documented and being accepted by the Senate. So the end of the level, whenever that you change the table 4, it need to be accepted and agreed by the Senate. Then it's including to change the CLO. If you find out the CLO for the subject that you are teach are basically not able to be, not relevant or not able to achieve by the students, you wanted to change accordingly, yes, you can. But do remember the verb that you are using for the CLO, everything must consider measurable. So how are you going to consider measurable? Like I said, the Bloom taxonomy. Okay, so this is basically a Bloom taxonomy. Every lecturer that exists in this today's session or even in our institution need to understand what is a Bloom taxonomy, because this Bloom going to help you toward assessing your assessment, including developing your learning outcome and also a lesson for the specific subject and topics. So Bloom's taxonomy is basically have how many levels? 6 levels altogether, including the first one is a remember, understand, apply, analyze, and evaluate, and also create. This is basically a level how the student progress from the bottom level, the first level, we call it as a level number 1, then the student able to progress accordingly up until they are able to achieve the higher level by the end of the semester, for example, by the end of the diplomas, the degree, the masters, after they completed all the program, they are able to achieve the higher level of the Bloom taxonomy. The concern about the Bloom also not just to indicate the student level, they're going to help you to design your lesson plan, especially toward your course learning outcome, because the verbs that used in designing under the Bloom taxonomy is considered the verb that are measurable for the student, so for the lesson development, lesson plan and also development, sorry. Example of the course learning outcome that we can do. Okay, so I have some example here on the course of the chemistry. Level of the foundations, topic chemical bonding, for example, subtopic a covalent bond. Content definition of the content of the subject as listed here, definitions of the bonding, name of the formula, dot and cross diagram, molecular shapes, polarity, and the intermolecular forces. So how you're going to design, looking into the content of the subject, how you're going to design the course learning outcome. So this is some of the example of the course learning outcome that you might going to design. But then, like I said, do remember whenever that you design the course learning outcome, the words used, the verb used have been considered measurable for the concern. So what we have here is basically understand the covalent bonding, know the name of the compound, learn the formula, draw the dot and cross diagram, describe the bonding, explain the molecular, draw the molecular, identify the polarity, identify the type, understand the type. Can we use all these CLO in order to develop our subject and lesson plan? Can we use it? Not, I can see some that you can use it, some you cannot use it. Why? Because they have some of the verb used here we consider as are not measurable for the student concerned. Let's say, for example, the word understand here. Can we measure the people understand? Cannot. Okay. So let's say we're going to pick a group of 10 people in a group. How are you going to measure the understandable of the student whenever you do the lecture? You cannot. That's why the word understand here are not advisable to put under the course learning outcome. You can see, you can use the other words, for example, to define covalent bonding, for example, which is the student need to able to define, to examine, which is the student should be able to examine. Okay, rather than we use the word understand, because those words understand under the Bloom taxonomy is basically the verb that are not able to be measured. Same goes to the other verb, for example, no names. Can we do the no names under the CLO? The answer is cannot. You can change it to other ones, what we call it as a define. You can use a define, not a problem, because the verbs used is basically considered measurable. Can the student learn? Yes, the student can learn, but the word learn is basically not measurable. Okay. Sometimes when we are designing the CLO, we're going to say, I wanted the student to learn the formula. Yes, we understand you, teacher. We understand you, lecturer. But then you cannot put the words learn as a part of your CLO. Why? Again, like I said, because the word learns is not considered measurable verbs. You have to change it a bit. You're going to rewrite it a bit and use what we consider as a measurable verb. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to find the verbs? Again, refer back to the Bloom taxonomy. Okay, then draw is okay, describe is fine, explain, perfect, draw again, yes, to identify, yes, identify, yes, understand, no. Okay, right? Do remember whenever that you designed your curriculums, your subjects, make sure you use the words that are considered measurable according to the Bloom taxonomy. So another example, understand the functions of the heart cannot be measured. Okay, again, the word understand, you cannot measure how people able to understand. Okay, So what you can do, explain, use another verbs, they are considered measurable. So means when you develop the assessment later, which is you develop their quiz, the student quiz, the final the exam paper and so on and so forth, you can ask accordingly. You can ask the student, please explain, blah, 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 and so on. Okay, so whenever the student are able to explain, you are able to mark accordingly. Okay, so that's what we consider as a measurable verbs. Okay, then it is suitable. Then example number 2, identify and explain the component in the motherboard of the computer. Can you use 2 verbs in one CLO? The answer is not advisable. So why? Yes, the verb is correct. You can use identify, you can use example, but putting 2 verbs in one CLO is always not an advice. Why? Because it's too heavy for the student to achieve the CLO. Remember, CLO is basically course learning outcome. Course learning outcomes means what we wanted the student to achieve by the end of the semester, what we wanted the student to achieve by the end of the lesson. So if you are putting 2 verbs in a one CLO, you are basically generally wanted the student to achieve 2 things in one thing. What if the student are able to identify, but they are not able to explain? Can the student are considered achieve the CLO? So hence, this is not advisable. Can you do it? Yes, you can do it, but you're going to put it into the 2 different CLO. So means you're going to identify as a one CLO and explain as a one CLO. Why? Because again, like I said, the question is basically what if the student are able to identify, but they doesn't know how to explain. Does the student are considered achieve the CLO? That's the reason why we doesn't want to put 2 different verbs in one CLO. So when you are differentiate between 2 CLO, here the student can achieve one, perhaps they need to achieve another one later, and so on. So means you give a more ample time for the student to achieve accordingly when come to the CLO. Suitable, and so this is suitable. Okay, so again, this is some of the example of the Bloom taxonomy. Okay, how you're going to get the Bloom taxonomy? Again, Google. So whenever that you develop your questions, the exam paper, whenever you develop your lesson plans and so on and so forth, and you are basically have no idea what kind of verbs that you wanted to put in, always refer to the Bloom taxonomy. You can always Google and find what is a verb that's suitable for this students, what is a verb that's suitable for this group or level of the student. If you are teaching a foundation, they have a specific level under the Bloom taxonomy that designed for the foundation. The diploma student have basically a specific level, degree, master, and so on, so forth. So not every level are basically equivalent under the Bloom taxonomy. So if you wanted to know what level the subject you are teaching, always refer back to your program leader, always refer back to your academic department head, because they are the one who are basically holding the blueprint for the program, the table 4. They can always refer back what level and what you can assess when come to the student assessment. Okay, plan the content, recommend to apply backwards designing by the grant, and J, in the book Understanding by Design, step identify the desired result, what are big ideas and important knowledge should the student retain, identify and differentiate the type of bonding into substance based on the data provided. So whenever that you plan a content, like I said, it's basically need to follow your CLO. So what you want the student to achieve and how you want the student to achieve. If you wanted the student to understand a certain concept, so make sure you design your content accordingly. So, what knowledge and skill the student should know, how to name and write formula, for example, how to draw the diagram and compositions of the substance. What info good to know by the student, and least important, least important, which is table salt, sea salt, rock salt, and all content compound, for example. Okay, determine the acceptable evidence. Important plan for the formative and summative assessment based on the CLO. Ask the questions, how do I know if the student have achieved the desired result? What are the best assessment tool to collect evidence? Okay, to determine the acceptable evidence. What is determine acceptable evidence? Is basically you wanted to know either the students are basically able to achieve CLO or not. Remember, whenever that we are designing the subjects, the plan is basically for us to be able to see project either the student are able to achieve or not. So how you're going to know is basically to determine the evidence. What evidence that you wanted to have is basically the assessment, okay? The student need to submit the assessment accordingly in order for you to know either they are able to achieve the CLO for the subject or not, which is the assessment that you're going to design throughout the subject. So what kind of assessment that you can design? It can be anything as long as they are suitable for the subject. When come to the evidence, when come to the assessments, okay, we call it assessment rather than evidence, okay, which is you're going to collect the evidence through assessment. When come to the assessment, they have a two type of the assessment. We call it as a formative and summative assessment. So what is a formative assessment? Teaching what the student need to know and what we want to teach. Not one reference book covers by need. Your needs mix and match. Ask the questions, what knowledge and skill are required to perform the specific assessment, what we aim to be taught, what need to be taught and how it should be delivered, and what activity are equip the student with the knowledge and skill, and what material and resources are best to achieve the goal. So when you design the assessment, you need to occupy the student with all the skill in order to complete the assessment. Okay, let's say, for example, you wanted the student to have assignments on the specific topics. Think that, okay, this is the assignment for the student, but before you're going to deliver the assignment to the student, you have to make sure that the students are able to do it, the assignment accordingly. So how you wanted to make sure the student are able to do it? You're going to teach them how to do it. You're going to provide all the information, the skills that they need in order to complete the assignment. So that which is you need to deliver first in order for the student to be able to achieve whatever that you wanted them to achieve in the subject and topics. Okay. The seventh event of the instruction modified any seven event of the instruction. So this is basically the idea on how we're going to present the lessons to the students throughout the classroom. The first is basically to gain the student attentions, define the objective, which is the CLO, recall the knowledge and present the content, elicit the performance, provide the feedback and assess the performance. So we're going to go one by one. Again, the student attention. Why do the student need to know about the topic? The step in the capture student attention and engage them in the learning process. So how are we going to get the student attention as what we are learning in the class assessment last time? You can always do several activities and so on and so forth in the classroom, make the classroom have more fun in order to gain their attentions, to focus throughout 2 hours classes, for example. If you have longer than 2 hour classes, perhaps you need to design more what you can do in order to get the student focus attention throughout the 2 hours. As a common questions related to the topic, ask through show interest, fact diagram, pictures, maybe some quiz. Then inform learners of the objective. What do the student need to know to be able to do course learning outcome? Help to provide the mental hooks and what they need to achieve. At the end of this lesson, you should be able, blah, 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 and so on. Okay. So is that important to let the student know about the course learning outcome? We can see that you can share the learning outcome to the student, but the most importantly for them to understand what you wanted them to achieve. Let's say, for example, on the first class meeting on the first semester, the first week of the new semester of the student, you can always allow to tell the student saying that, okay, by the end of the semester, I wanted to see that you are able to achieve the certain level of skill. I wanted to see that you are able to do it. I wanted to know that you are able to understand all the concepts, which is those are basically delivering the learning objective, learning outcome for the subject. So you are telling the students, saying that students, this is the first week of the semester. By the end of the semester, by the week 12, by the week 11th, I wanted you should be able to do this and that. Okay, so that's how we deliver the learning objective, so that the student know, oh, by the end of the semester, I should able to build a robot, for example. I should be able to do this. I should be able. So it's going to keep the learners have more interest for the subject. Stimulate recall of prior knowledge. Which of the prior knowledge can be a foundation for the topic? This step help the student to make connection between the past lesson and experience with the today lesson. So means you can always do the pop quiz, reviewing, and the summarizing for the topic. So whatever that you have done earlier on the previous week is going to be the continuous topic on the current week and following week. And so example. So make the connection between the lesson so that you can have more fun with the student, and your student also have more fun on learning the topic as you are deliver. Present the content. How much do I need to cover for the topic? Coverage must follow the CLO. Lesson should be in structured and organized manner. So this is a very common question when come to the teachers, to the lecturers, whereby whenever they have been given specific topic, the question is, how much do I need to cover for the topic? How much the student need to learn? What level the student need to understand, and so on and so forth. The common answer to these questions is basically you need to go back to your CLO of the subject. So you read the CLO, then you will understand what kind of the outcome that you expect the student by the end of the lessons. So you're going to teach accordingly following the outcomes. Okay, so by the end of the semester, let's say, for example, the CLO is basically to make the student able to cook the nasi lemak again. Okay, why nasi lemak? Probably I'm hungry this morning. Okay, so you have to teach them accordingly so that by the end of the semester, they are able to cook the nasi lemak. Okay, that's a good enough. So you don't have to say that, okay, I wanted the student to be able to cook the nasi lemak, not just a nasi lemak, maybe all the lauk that come together, which is the rendang ayam, the rendang daging, and so on and so forth. Is that following the learning outcome? Yes, because the student are able to cook the nasi lemak, but all the side dishes is not including in the learning outcome. So it's not necessary for you to teach them, okay? Because the learning outcome only indicate the students should be able to cook the nasi lemak. Then hence, you should stop there, okay? Maybe the side dishes going to be teach on the following semester, going to be teach on the other topics or other subject. So when come to the present the content, you need to teach them only what they need to achieve and come to the course learning outcome. So, but then some of the lecturer, they are being too ambitious, saying that I wanted the student to know more. I wanted the student to have more knowledge. Yes, we can do that, not a problem, okay? Because as long as you are achieving the course learning outcome, it should be enough for the student and also for the topic. But if you are giving more as what the students doesn't need, not saying that the student doesn't need, but you are teaching more, it's going to be more burden for the student. Do remember, the subject that you are teaching is not the only subject that the students are learning on the particular semester. Perhaps they are taking another 5 or 6 subjects that come together on the same semester. So if you are giving more than what is suggested to the CLO, to the table 4, you are basically burdening the student more compared than what they should achieve. Okay, cool. So that's our basically present the content. Authentic lesson should use a real world example, variety teaching style, visual, oral. That activities highlight the important part of the lesson verbally and colors and etc. Okay, elicit performance. What engaging and interesting in the learning activity will ask the student to complete to meet their needs and experience. Activity and brief and non-valuative. Ask brief question to the main point. Ask student to summarize the process. Have student to write down an answer and cross-check with the neighbors and have student write down answer why you are circling the classes. So you're going to elicit the performance to look through either the student are basically able to absorb whatever that you are teaching them. How you're going to do it? By asking the question and answer sessions. Okay, usually by end of the classes. Any questions, students? So most of the time, the student not going to ask you a question. Why? Because they need to finish, they wanted to finish fast with the classes. Okay, if they ask a question, this class going to take long and so on and so forth. But at least, like I said, you do your part in case they have some student wanted to ask the questions. And if they are asking the question accordingly to the lesson, is basically one of the achievement, not saying achievement, you are following the course learning outcome. So means the student are almost there to achieve the outcome of the subject because they are absorbing the lessons. They understand whatever they need to understand and you are deliver perfectly and make the student able to ask the question accordingly for the topic. Provide a feedback. How do I feedback the student on the response? Feedback is useful to assess student progress, identify areas for the improvement, and reinforce correct understanding and behavior. For example, give a correct answer to the entire class, give key answer after the group discussions, and point the correct answer in the textbooks. Okay, so we are suggesting every single time that you are deliver the assessment to the students, either they are assignments, either they are quiz, either they are a midterm exam, always provide the feedback. Return back the feedback to the students so that whenever they have a questions, when come to the feedback that you can explain accordingly. Then the student also able to get which area they are basically doing it wrong so that they can improve on the next following assessment. Okay, don't keep your student assignment without sharing the feedback to the student. Okay. We are always advised, we can say they are always a compulsory for you to provide the feedback to the students so that they can have the improvement for the next assessment. Assess the performance. How will you know that with the when the student have achieved the goal of the lesson, great work to evaluate what degree the learners acquire to desire outcome. For example, the test, quiz, exercises. Okay, so how you wanted to know the performance? By doing the assessment. The assessment that we are given to the students generally are a feedback from their outcome. How much they are able to achieve their outcome. Is all the students in the classroom are able to achieve accordingly? Maybe they have one or two students not able to achieve. That's basically the outcome that we want, which is to assess through their performance. Distribution of the instructional time across for the 50 minutes. So this is basically what been suggested on the 50-minute classes, which is the first 5 minutes to gain attentions. Then the next one, inform the learner the objectives, stimulate the recall for the knowledge, present the content, performance, provide the feedbacks, and also assess the performance. Some lesson might not have all the instructional event or longer time to recall for the prior knowledge. So we can understand that some of the lessons, which is the subject, they might going to have a different nature than what it can be designed on the instructional event. Not a problem, especially toward the hands-on subject, which is the student need to be practically over there and done whatever it need to be done. Okay, it's not a problem for you to follow whatever the nature of your subject when you taught them. Experience is the best guide. Okay, so this is some examples on how we're going to do all the 7 steps. Okay, it's basically to develop a day one plan. So, okay, ice breaking. So what you can do, get to know each other. Day one plan, introduce your course outline, present house rule, may repeat at or later beginners of the level activities on the knowledge coverage of the course. Looking forward for the next class and closure reminder for the next class and with the encouragement. So this is basically the ice breaking session that usually going to happen on the first sessions on the first semester or first day, which is are we going to straight away to start with the topic number 1? I can say that it's up to you, it's up to the lecturer, it's up to the teacher, how you're going to handle your classes. If you're going to say that I have so much to cover for this semester, as soon as a day 1, I'm going to start with the lesson number 1. Go ahead and do it. But before you're going to start with the lesson 1, do the small ice breaking sessions. What is the need of the ice breaking session? Again, you need to let the learners, let the student know what is your objective for what is the course objective for this topic, which is the course learning outcome, what you wanted the student to achieve by the end of the semester. Okay, so on the first class, you're going to say, okay, students, by end of the semester, after learning in my classes, you should be able to do this and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's how you're going to do the ice breaking session. Then perhaps if you have so much topic to cover, as soon as the day 1, you already start with the lesson 1, go ahead and do it. Continue after the small ice breaking sessions, because the student need to know what is basically you wanted them to learn, to achieve throughout the subject, throughout the lesson. All right, 10 minutes break. Shall we take a 10 minutes break, everyone? Okay, then we come back on the 10th at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. 10-minute breaks. Okay, shall we continue? Everyone? Okay, let's continue. Okay, next one is going to discuss about the assessments. Okay, what is the assessment all about? It's basically the assignment that you give to the student, the exam that you give to the students, okay? Under the assessment, they have two different assessment, what we call as a formative and summative assessment. So what is a formative assessment? Formative assessment are designed to monitor a student progress during the learning process and provide feedback and guide the improvement, what we consider as a continuous and ongoing assessment. Formative assessment is basically assessment that have been done continuously, which is maybe from the week 1 go to the week 2, week 3, and so on, so forth. So all the assessment that we consider as a continuous and ongoing assessment going to be discussed under the formative assessment. Assessment are tools to measure the achievement of the CLO of the course. The method used must be suitable for collecting evidence regarding the achievement of the learning outcome. Okay, so what is the need of the assessment is basically the measure tools for the CLO. How are we going to measure our CLO? Our objective is basically through the assessment given to the student. So formative assessments include the assignments, okay, the quizzes, weekly assessment, presentations, or even online group and discussion. Whenever that you are basically have a rubrics in order to mark the group discussions, the online discussions, that can be considered as a assessment. And all these things we consider as a formative assessment. Why formative assessment? Because it's ongoing task. Okay, ongoing task. Because you can have the quiz number 1, quiz number 2, assignment number 1, assignment number 2, not a problem. Okay, formative assessment show the student progress and areas that need to be improved. Formative assessment provide an info of the how effective is the lessons is, how much students have learned and reteach. They provide more instruction and material, and who needs the extra help, which is among a group of students. Perhaps whenever that you collect the informations of the formative assessment, you able to figure out, okay, these students are basically quite low, quite slow. Okay, so she or he need an extra help. These students are basically already good enough. Everything, the assessment that you are given to him or her, are basically she or he able to achieve accordingly. But then this one specific student, or maybe two specific students, they are not able to achieve yet. So you need to help them more, and so on, so forth. Then we also have another assessment that we call as a summative assessment. Summative assessment are conducted to assess attainment of the CLO determined by the course, evaluate knowledge at the end of the learning periods. So when we talk about the summative assessment, it's basically assessment that going to be assessed by the end of the learning period, by the end of the semester, because you collecting the whole data throughout the semester and assess them accordingly by the end of the semester. Summative assessment method can be summarized as a final exam project paper, okay, which is the end of the semester. The student need to submit the project paper, the final project, final practical exam. So whenever have this assessment only going to be done once at the end of the semester and going to summarize every lesson within, we call it as a summative assessment. Okay, they are not ongoing assessment, but only happen once at the end of the semester, and the topic that cover going to summarize every single lesson that you taught from the first week up until the end of the weeks of the semester. Summative assessment provide information how well the student are able to achieve the CLO. So when come to the summative assessment, whatever result that we are able to collect from the assessment, this assessment generally going to define either the student are able to achieve the CLO or not for the topic. So if the student are basically able to succeed, which is able to pass every single thing, we consider that the student are able to achieve the CLO. if happen to have a students, they are failed the subject, they are not able to answer the final exam, they are basically leave everything blank when come to the for the exam paper. They are not able to perform on the project paper, not able to perform in the final practical exam. So we consider this group of students are basically not able to achieve the CLO. So what happened to these students? You are a teacher, you are a lecturer, you know better, then the student have to retake the subject, which is they are fail and have to repeat the subject for the following semester and need to achieve again accordingly. So that's basically the summative and formative assessment, the difference between formative and summative assessment. Okay, because most of the lecturer are basically get confused. What is a formative assessment? What is a summative assessment? Do bear in mind, formative assessment is ongoing assessment, which is the assessment that you assess throughout the semester. Summative assessment is only happen once and by the end of the semester. That's a summative assessment. Type of questions on the final exam. When come to the final exam, you can design accordingly as much as you want, okay? Which is you can do the multiple choice questions, which is commonly used to measure knowledge, comprehension, and application advantage, cover wide range of the topic and level, easy for the marking concerns, okay? Then disadvantage, time consuming, poor design might give hints to the student about the answer, okay? So multiple choice question is basically a very popular design when come to the designing the exam questions. Structure of the MCQ, this is basically the questions. Which metal is a liquid at room temperature? Okay, then you're going to give the answer, the correct answer. It can be either either A, B, C, or even D. Then the rest of the not considered as an answer, we call it as a distractor. Okay, which is the distractor, not the correct answer. Example of poorly designed MCQ questions. Usually when come to the distractor, right, it can be a similar question, similar answer as the correct answer. So means you are not direct them to pick the answer. But then this is what we consider as a poor design MCQ. For example, the artist who drew the famous Kids on Bicycle mural in the Penang is basically, if you look into the answer, you can surely it's going to be the first one. Why? Because John Cena is not definitely Cristiano Ronaldo. Definitely not. Samad Said. So you can guess the answer. So which one is the answer? Is basically the first one. Why? Because the distractor for the questions is basically considered not relevant. Okay, so when we are designing the distractor, it must be not the correct answer, but perhaps the almost similar to the correct answer. Which vitamin are fat solubles? The question is basically A, the answer is basically B. Alternative, none of the above. Can you put all of the above? This is basically not a good distractor. Rather than you put all of the above, perhaps you might going to say none of the above, which is they have not none of the answer when come to the distractor, which is you are not directing them to the answer, but you are basically giving some confusion for the student to pick what is the best answer. The concept of final management, okay, this one another example, unequal length and not in order. Okay, so it's another example, the STEM clue. Which of the following breath technique is used by the water Harsha, which is and define demons in the Demon Slayer series. So definitely water. Why? Because here is generally already have given the answer to the questions. Tips of application and analysis of the question is include a data, graph and diagram. Require application of the certain concept theories and also a formulas. For example, you're going to give certain theory or maybe a small case study and make them to do calculations if required to do a calculation in order for them to find the answer. But then this design, like I said, it need to be followed the attainment level of your students. Okay, if you are teaching the final semester student, yes, the question can be heavy as much as a need and require for the final year student. But then if you are teaching only the first semester student on the first year, perhaps you're going to design in a simple way so that they are basically able to attend all the question and also the answer. Short answer question and also long answer question. Can we design it the short answer and long answer question? Yes. For the format have been given by our exam units, yes, you can always design it in the either short answer or long answer question. Short answer question normally require a short response, maybe perhaps one or few sentences only. Easily assess student abilities according to the Bloom taxonomy. So when you are designing the exam paper, you have to refer accordingly towards your Bloom taxonomy. So use the verbs accordingly as been suggested by the Blooms. Okay, so not just verbs you are using, the level of attainment, the domain that you're going to use is not to be followed accordingly. How are you going to measure the domains? By on the use of the Bloom taxonomy. Like I said, if you are not sure, go ahead and ask your program leader, go ahead and ask your academic department head, because they are the one who are basically holding the blueprint, the table 4, that should be able to answer all your questions regarding on the level of study and also level, not level of study, level of the attainment on the Bloom taxonomy in order for you to design the exam paper for your student. Okay, short answer question example. This is some of the good example that are following what is been suggested under the Bloom. To identify the two bodies of the regulate, then is basically a knowledge, because the student need to identify. Describe the role of the 3 civil courts is basically understanding, and calculate the velocity of the proton is basically application, because the student need to apply certain formula. So if you can see here, this is basically what is required under the Bloom taxonomy, using the specific verbs as been suggested under the Bloom level. So this is what we consider one of the good exam question design. Okay, long answer questions. Essay normally require response from a few paragraphs. Long answer question also allows students to demonstrate their higher order thinking skills. So how are you going to design the long answer question? Depending on the nature of your subject, perhaps the question might going to carry a heavy marks. How heavy it can be heavy? You are basically the one who are best to design and know more about your subject. It can be between 10 to 20 marks. Okay, so for example, with the help of diagram, assess the effectiveness of the government's policy. So this question going to carry 20 marks. With the help of the diagram, perhaps the diagram already been provided. Perhaps the student need to draw the diagram and explain accordingly, assess, and so on, so forth. Globalization will help to achieve economic growth in high-income economics, and this will automatically improve the living standard. Evaluate this statement. So from the statement that you are given, the student need to use their critical thinking in order to be able to answer the questions. Okay, so that's how the long essay question can be designed. Perhaps you can also put the case study, and the student need to answer accordingly under the long essay questions. Evaluate and also evaluate. Step of the planning of the question, decide on your goal and purpose of asking your question. Your goal should help to determine what level of question you will ask. Okay, so this is a very important whenever that you are designing the question to your student. You need to know what level that students that you need to assess. Okay, if their assessment only require understanding, remembering, ask the question accordingly. If the question, the level are required them to apply, so ask the question accordingly. And if the level are required them to evaluate, to propose, to design, so ask the questions accordingly. But then the first is basically for you to determine the level of your subject and the lessons. Choose material which you consider important as the content for the question. Do not mislead them by emphasizing less important material. Avoid the question that can be answered yes or no unless you are going to follow with more questions to explore reasoning. So by any means, okay, whenever that you design a questions, try to avoid a question that going to lead the answer either between yes and no. Okay, perhaps if the question are basically specifically asking yes and no, not a problem, but you need to add a little bit more after the question, saying that this explain accordingly. For example, if the student indicate yes, then explain why yes. If the student explain no, then indicate the answer no, then explain why no. Okay, rather than you giving the choices only the answer is yes and no when come to the AC question. Prepare, get ready, and refer. Having a prepared list of the question will help to ensure that you ask a question appropriate for your goals and representative in the importance of the materials. Okay, phrase your question so that the task is clear to the student. Describe type of chemical bonding between versus describe three main types of chemical bonding. Okay, for examples, whenever that you are designing the question, make sure the question is clear to the students, saying that this is one of the example. If you are asking about the chemical bonding and you already know that only have three types of chemical bonding. So rather than you ask a very generic questions, which is describe the types. Okay, maybe you want going to say describe the three main types or main components, main this and that and so on. Give a number so that the students are able to answer accordingly. So your student should not contain the answer. Avoid imply the response question when you are genuine seeking the opinion. Don't we all agree EV in the future? Okay, as a questions, do we all agree? Which is you are basically imply the response rather than you asking the opinion. If you wanted to asking opinions which of your student throughout the exam paper, then ask, what is your opinion on the statement? What do you think the statement are describing about? Rather than you going to put into a strong statement, do we all agree? What? So change the questions, rephrase the word, use the correct verb in order to make the question are more reliable for the student to answer accordingly on your exam paper. When planning your question, try to anticipate possible students' response. So this is one of the things when we are suggesting when the lecturer are designing the question. When you design the questions, you already have an idea how your student going to answer it. Okay, so if your student if you are basically interpret that the student are able to answer accordingly as they are going through your lessons, then it's a good question to be designed. But then if you are designing the question, then you are anticipate that your student might not able to answer the question because maybe you are not teaching them enough. Maybe you are not include the question as a part of the lesson and so on and so forth. So it's not considered as a good question to be asked in the exam paper. So always have a focus, always anticipate, always not saying you figure out, you're going to look through either your student are able to answer the question that you are designing for their assessment. Coursework with the weightage of 30% as a final assessment require a moderation, which is require questions and answer script. Okay, why? Because it's considered as a part of the marking rubric. Is that the marking rubric is important? Yes, it is very important. We're going to go through for the marking rubric after this. This is basically what we have for the exam blueprint for the final assessment. Is basically the format that have been designed by our exam unit that need to follow accordingly, which is this is a Bloom level. Okay, so make sure that you understand what is the level of your students that you are teaching before you are designing the questions. If the level are basically acquire them to evaluate and create, then design the question accordingly under this group. if you are teaching a group of students that their level only stop at applying, so design accordingly up until applying, doesn't touch this area at all, because why? It's not yet their level. Okay, so if you are teaching the student that acquire their level to be assessed under analyzing up until analyzing, so means you can answer, you can design a question start from remember up until analyzing level. Okay, don't go beyond from what their attainment level is. Why? Because if you go beyond, it means you are assessing more than what it should. Okay, then you are assessing more than what it should. So it's not good. So this is exam guideline and blueprint that come together with the just now. This is a level, as you can see. Okay, the exam unit already providing the level. If you are not sure, you can always refer to your program leader and academic department head. Marking scheme and the rubrics. So this is basically, is that important for us to have a marking rubric, so marking scheme and also rubric when designing the assessment? The answer is yes, because it's going to be a document going to guide the examiner in grading the student, feedback to the student on their performance. Do remember, as what we said earlier, whenever that you assess a student, whenever that you give assessment to the student, you need to provide a feedback to the student. Why? Especially under the formative assessment, so that they know where they are doing wrong, so that they can improve accordingly throughout the semester. Okay, this is document known as a marking scheme, grading sheet, marking rubrics, and etc. Assessment that have definite answers, such as mathematics and science subject, can have a simple marking scheme depending on the nature of the subject. Some of the subject require a specific marking scheme, means this is going to be the only answer for the marking scheme. But then there are also the subject, they can have a various answer as long as they are related to the topic. Okay, so it can be have a simple or subject specific marking scheme, again depending of the nature of the subject. However, assessment that measures several criteria in questions, thus we need to use more complex version that is normally known as a marking rubrics. So what is a marking rubric? Is basically the assessment for the topics or lesson that require more hands-on and also skill evaluation. So that's what we call as a marking rubrics. They are become more complex. Okay, they have a specific assessment that need to achieve in order for them to done the assessment. So does the marking scheme and marking rubric is important? Again, yes, it's a very important. Okay, it's very important. Okay, in order, so every single time that you are design your assessment, do bear in mind it need to come together with either marking rubric or marking scheme. Don't just designing the question only without any the marking script and also a rubric, because the student need to know how to improve whenever marks have been given to them accordingly. So some of the examples how you're going to design the marking scheme and rubrics, like I said, is always go back to the nature of the subject. So this is the marking rubrics that also can work for the hands-on and practical classes. Criteria, you can have the standard and also descriptor, which is how you describe every single marks given. Okay, if it need to be improved, is that poor, is that need to be improved, is that good, is that excellent? Okay, so that's a rubrics. Criteria, the properties and characteristics which the assessment task is going to be judged. Standards, the level of performance that might be achieved by a student against each individual, and criteria and the rubrics. And then descriptor, descriptions of the quality, demonstrate the achievement of each standard for criteria from the highest to the lowest. Share the rubric with the students in the assignment brief or during the class activity. Okay, question to ask when constructing the rubric. So what knowledge and skill is the assignment are designed for to assess? what observed criteria represent those knowledge and skill, and how can I best divide those criteria to represent a meaningful level of student performance. So like I said, whenever that you are constructing the rubrics, if you are assessing their level, skill levels, okay, so you're going to assess accordingly on what type of skill and knowledge that you wanted the student to achieve. So how you're going to assess them, on how you're going to rate them, either from the poor, either can be improved, or excellence levels. So that's how you're going to think through when come to the constructing the rubric. Rubric can be they can have a specific rubric for the specific subject. They can have one rubric for every single similar subject, for example, and so on and so forth. Okay, and it can be designed in constructive manner, means they have some area they are basically need to be similar to the others, but they have also the area they're going to be very subjective depending on the nature of the subject. Let's say, for example, if you are designing a rubric for the kitchen classes, okay, the students are going to get into several kitchen classes, and then the first rubric is basically to assess toward their hygienes, okay. The hygiene topic is very generic, so it can have a similar rubric for the hygiene for every kitchen assessment, not a problem. But then when come to the specific topic, let's say this kitchen are basically teaching about the pastry, so the rubric going to focus on the pastry topic. This kitchen going to talk about local cuisine, for examples. So the rubric going to focus more towards the assessing the food under the local cuisines. So that's basically how we're going to constructing the rubrics. What observable criteria of the student works differentiate among the performance levels of each criteria, and how effective the rubric in assessing the achievement of the CLO. Okay, like I said, you can design the rubric in a different way as long as it's going to fit the nature of the subject. But the most importantly, this rubric and marking scheme, it need to able to achieve the CLO, which is whatever that you are designing for the CLO, whatever that you wanted the student to achieve under the course learning outcome, the rubric should able to measure accordingly. Okay, if under the learning outcome you wanted the student to achieve a certain level of the skill, then the rubric have to show the skill performance. Okay, so that's how the rubric going to be constructing. So this is one of the examples. You can have this kind of rubric, or maybe you can have other ways on doing the rubric, as long as they are going to fit the subject that you are teaching. Okay, academic misconduct, we're almost there. It's quite common to understand about the academic misconduct. Refer to any action that are received, try to accept or help others in accepting or trying to receive unfair academic advantage. It includes a plagiarism, collusion, contract cheating, fabrication, possession of unauthorized the material. Academic misconduct in the final exam, from action to the curtail of the misconduct. Refer to the guideline of the central exam invigilation by the exam department. If you happen to invigilating the student final exam, then you happen to catch one of the student are basically copy or bring the unwanted material to the exam, what you can do, always report back to the exam department. They know how to tackle the problems. Okay, but then on our nature of the classrooms, the common misconduct we can consider as a plagiarism. Okay, it's quite common to happen, especially in the availability of the technology and AI that we have at the moment, which is the using of the AI for the student to done the assessment is quite widely. Okay, so it can be considered as a plagiarism and cheating toward the assessment. Plagiarism refer to the taking someone else's works or ideas, include someone also can be considered as AI, as your own without a proper citation. Signs of the plagiarism: different standards of the writing, inconsistent formatting, lack of citation. use of unusual advanced vocabulary and inconsistent writing style. I do believe you already know your students. You know how their level of the writing, the level of the English, for examples, whenever they are submitting the assignment, that more high and advanced writing style and skills. So that's one of the signs of the plagiarism. Or even nowadays, we make it more easy, which is to use the Turnitin in plagiarism checker. Can we use Turnitin in our institution, UOW Malaysia? The answer is yes. How are we going to make it happen? As seen on the slide just now, you can always contact Mr. Hazim from our TLC. Is our colleague in the teaching and learning department, which is for you to have the Turnitin account, or for you to ask to help under the Turnitin checkers. Okay, so you can always are welcome to come to the TLC and see Mr. Hazim and ask accordingly when come to the Turnitin for the plagiarism checker. Okay, action and plagiarism case. What you can do whenever that you find your students are basically plagiarize the other person's assessments and so on. What you're going to do, warning later, if you want the student to have the warning later. The always step that we can do is basically for us, the student, to do the resubmissions of their assessment. If after the second resubmission, they are still a plagiarism concern, then you can discuss with your school, with your academic head departments, what is your best step for you to apply to the student. Fail the grade for the particular academic works, fail grade for the particular course, or maybe the worst cases, permanent exclusion from the university college. Okay, so this is the worst can happen. Okay, if the student keep on copying, keep on plagiarizing other student works as a part of the submissions, assessment of the submission, yes, we can always dismiss them from the school or even the university. Okay, it's a recap, the summarize of the two-day topic. Always refer to the learning outcome when planning the lesson. Focus to the must know what matters in an activity. Use the Garnier of the 7th event of the instruction. Plan lesson and flow, and plan the assessment before the start of the semester. Assessment more than 30% must be moderated, which is need to have a rubrics and marking scheme, and must remind the student about the academic misconduct and consequences. Okay, so what we are learning throughout this 2D refresher course of the lesson plan is basically, do remember your CLO is basically not need to be designed on the something that are more achievable for the student. It need to be able to measure, it need to be able to achieve by the students. Okay, so whenever you are designing the subject, you are designing the topic for your classes, for your lessons, you should have something in mind saying that, okay, my students should be able to achieve this on their level of attainment. If they are diploma level, they should be able to achieve this. If they are degree student, they should be able to achieve this level, and so on and so forth. So including when designing the exam paper, you are designing the questions, at the same time you already have an idea how the student going to answer it accordingly. You already have an idea either the student are able to answer it or not. Okay, don't design on something that are not considered achievable for the student. Okay, as a teacher, we wanted the student to achieve higher and so on, but then do remember, yes, you can have the idea of the student should be able to achieve this and that, should be higher than this and that, but then it has to go back to what level they are studying at the moment. If they are foundation student, design on the way that this is a foundation student level. So, okay, don't go too high up until the foundation student should be able to answer the master level exam paper. No, okay, they should be able to achieve what they need to achieve on their level. Okay, cool. All right, that's it. Thank you. Any questions that I have for today's sessions? Everyone? No? As usual, you are also a student for today's sessions, right? Surely you have no questions. Okay, if you don't have anything, I guess that's it for today. If you have anything to ask regarding on today's lesson or topic of your, or you need to these slides as a part of the reference, you're always welcome to text, to email to the TLC department and ask accordingly as a part. Maybe you need something for the class reference and assessments and so on. Go ahead and reach us in the teaching and learning departments, and we're going to provide whatever that you need accordingly. If you don't have anything, I guess that's it for today's sessions. Yeah, I'm going to see you around in the campus. Thank you, guys. Bye. You're welcome.